And welcome to the November meeting of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. I'm Steve Oleko, the political director of the organization. And before we get started, I want to tell you one of the things we found with Zoom meetings over the years. Um, we will not put links in the chat because people then are going back and forth in the chat and they're missing the presentation. But we will send you an email tomorrow, which will be titled Links from the November Progressive Caucus meeting. And three of the links that will be in there for sure will be join the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. I'm looking around the room and it seems like everybody here is a member. Um, but sometimes, when we promote our meetings publicly, people come in and they're not members and they hopefully like what they see and then they become members. There will also be a donate link. As many of you know, we are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed, and we depend on small contributions from people like you to keep us in business. Um, there will also be a link to a video of tonight's meeting. We record all of our meetings on our YouTube channel. We actually find that we have a lot more people that view this on YouTube than actually show up for the meetings. But we want to get that out because there's a lot of people that register and then they don't actually come to the meeting, but they know it's going to be on YouTube, so they wait and watch it later. We have a great topic tonight and a great speaker. Author Mark Dent is with us. He's local. He lives in Berea in Cuyahoga County. And he is just finishing up a book entitled The Great Betrayal: How America Abandoned the Middle Class. So we are going to have questions after Mark's presentation. And for the question part, you can either write the question in the chat or if you know how to work the icons below, do the raise your hand, and we promise we'll get to everyone's question. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our featured speaker tonight, author Mark Dent.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And Steve, actually, I sat down at his house. He's helping me polish up some of the stuff with my writing. But my name's Mark Dent. I've been attorney and I've done income taxes for the past 20 years. And one of the things is once I started doing income taxes, you find out a lot about people when you do income taxes. You find out a lot of secrets and a lot of things that are going on, and you hear a lot of stories, about the divorces, the bankruptcies, the financial struggles. And as I've done taxes, there's a few stories that kind of stick out and a few themes that I saw happening, and I wanted to begin to put this into a context and a frame that people would understand. And so, one of the things that happened to me, this was when I was in Columbus about 15 years ago, prior to the Affordable Care Act. There was one of my clients, she was a nurse at one of the premier cancer hospitals. She came down with breast cancer. And by doing her taxes and talking to her and everything, I found out that despite the fact she worked at one of these premier cancer hospitals, she had to go through and file for bankruptcy because she exceeded the caps on her insurance. And I found that somewhat outrageous. I've had clients that have come in that are working two, three jobs that are embarrassed that they have to go to food pantries to have enough food to feed the kids. Um, but the one story that kind of set me on the path to write this book was one I had a friend of mine, he was an accountant. He did the accounting side, but he came to me and I prepared his taxes. He had a daughter that had just graduated school. She played soccer all through high school. Well, after high school, she decided she was going to open her own business. And so she came to me, her and two of her other friends, and I always remember them walking through my door. They had made hoodies, and on the front of the hoodies said Midnight Cleaners, the name of their new business venture. And what they would do, they would go to businesses and they'd start the shift at 9 o'clock at night and they'd clean for these businesses and make sure the businesses were ready for the next day. And I remember she came to me with all her tax stuff and everything, and they were so proud that throughout that year, the three of them had, after I figured out everything, they had made a profit of about $30,000, so $10,000 a piece. And when I did Sarah's taxes, I began to look at all the taxes she was paying. Now, she only paid $250 of federal income tax, but she also had to pay $1,500 of self-employment tax. She had to pay her city income tax. She had to pay the state taxes. And I began looking through all the taxes she was required to pay. She also waited tables on the side, so she made about $14,000 that year. And I said to her dad, I'm going to figure out how much taxes she paid. So I began looking at what went to real estate taxes, what went to sales taxes, what went to all the other taxes that people don't think about. And I started adding
That's right.
everything
That's what I
up.
told you about how they nickel and dime small
Hold
business.
it, I got it.
uh, add everything up. And once I added everything up, she was paying more than $7,000, more than half her income went some way, somehow to pay taxes. And this was after the Republicans had spent years saying we're reducing taxes. And it was that same year Mitt Romney was running for president. And as Mitt Romney was running for president, he was saying that, you know what, the people that aren't making much money, the people on that low end, they don't pay enough taxes. And he was talking to people like Sarah. He said 47% of the population pays no taxes. What he meant was they pay no income taxes. But there were people that paid no income taxes that still were paying a huge portion of their money towards taxes. And that started my journey to try to investigate and figure out what happened. And I don't know how to, do I need to go to my slideshow? Do I need to hit share? Or is the slideshow up?
No, you have to do it. You have to share it again.
Sure. Okay. Um,
But it should be queued up, ready for you to grab it.
okay. There we go.
No, the slide, okay, there you go. All right, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So I went on a project to write a book and begin to tell some of the stories and to begin to piece together how, despite the fact that they've been reducing taxes, why the middle class, why those at the bottom, why everybody felt so stretched and why it felt like they were paying more. And the fact is, they were paying more. So how much do we pay in taxes? Well, Sarah paid 50%. I also did a tax analysis of a theoretical couple that made about 55 million. And I prepared their income taxes and looked at how much of their income actually went towards taxes. Um, they paid about 8.6% of the income they made because much of the income is in hidden income. It's in the stock market. It's in these different vehicles that don't get taxed at all. And I looked at the middle class. Where's the middle class? And took the dividing line of 1980, and I said, what has happened after 1980 when the Republicans decided they were going to cut everybody's taxes? And as I started looking at the different figures, what I came up with is for every dollar in federal income taxes that were cut, as of 2024, working Americans pay an additional $2 in other taxes. So the median household saved about $5,000 in federal taxes, but the other taxes went up by $10,000. And so as I began looking at things, I began to say, well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And as I looked through the analysis and what was happening, I calculated that about $21 trillion over the past 46 years through different policies that has been implemented from our government went and transferred from the working class Americans to the wealthiest 34,000 individuals. And one of the explanations, and I'm sure I know that in progressive circles, this chart has been shown quite frequently. And I wanted to get into the roots of why this happened. If you looked at productivity and you looked at growth, you notice that there was, beginning in the 1970s, that wages stagnated. And the blue line there, I know that graph is kind of small, but the blue line is a productivity growth. So productivity kept going up, but wages didn't increase. And that's where I looked and I said, you know what? I want to research this. I want to find out what happened. And as I was looking through things, I first wanted to say, hey, why did productivity and wages begin to work together and why did they converge? And why was that happening in our economy? And as I'm researching, I looked at the New Deal. I looked what Roosevelt did, what Truman did. And what ended up happening was after World War II, they came together and they looked at things, and Truman especially said, you know what? If we don't make the middle class and people a part of this economy, if we don't look to make sure the wealth of our nation is shared equally, they were worried about communism. They looked and said, there is another system that's competing with us. And what Truman did, he got the unions and he got the CEOs together and he met with them and he said, you know what we're going to do? We are going to make sure you pay a fair wage. We are going to make sure that the middle class, that Americans that go to work every day, they can afford the automobiles. They can afford a decent house. They can work and they are going to share in the wealth that's generated by the country. And that held for about 30 years. And what came next was the Powell Memo. And the Powell Memo, I'm going to stop the share for right now. The Powell Memo, what it was Lewis Powell, he was an attorney that looked at things and he wrote a 34-page memo that he gave to the Chamber of Commerce. And in that 34-page memo, he laid out a plan. he laid out a plan saying what we're going to do is we are going to create what ended up being the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation. We are going to create these institutions that are going to begin to tell our message that we want the government to be more business friendly. His view was business friendly. What he was looking at, he was looking and saying, you know what? We don't like having to share the wealth with the middle class. We don't like the trajectory of the country. We prefer the Gilded Age, where the people that had wealth also had power and they had the ability uh, uh, to direct and write the rules. And he laid out a plan. He laid out a plan how they were going to take over the courts. He laid out a plan how they were going to compete with the media. He laid out a plan on how they were going to create a message that was going to help them do three things. Number one, what they wanted to do was reduce taxes on the rich. Number two, they wanted to break the back of labor. They did not want the American worker to be able to compete and have a level playing field with business. Um, and number three, they wanted to change the messaging and change the dynamic where their message was the one that broke through and where they controlled the levers of a government. And that project was put forth to the Chamber of Commerce in a secret memo. And right on the top of the memo, it said confidential memo, don't share with anyone. Well, what ended up happening was he was appointed to the Supreme Court 60 days after sending out that memo by President Nixon. And there was a reporter for the Washington Post that after he became the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court member, he got his hands on a copy of that memo. And that's the only reason we know about that memo and that project that was started. And you had different leaders like the Koch brothers, the Coors family, that all got together to begin to fund these new think tanks and to put in place his vision of the future. And one of the things about the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, they were different than the prior think tanks. The prior think tanks, how they focused on things is they would be presented problems. And when they were presented problems, they would look and say, well, what type of solution can we come up to deal with this problem? And then there'd be conservative solutions, there'd be liberal solutions, and they would come and work out a plan that would kind of deal with the problem. The Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute said, we're not doing that. We have these objectives that we want to do. We want to lower the taxes on the rich. We want to break the back of labor. We want to make sure that those who are wealthiest control the levers of government. And they said, that's our objective. Now let's look for problems we can find and figure out how we can create messages to help us progress our goals. And what they would do, they would come up with these one-page talking point memos and all that they would give to different congressmen. They would give to different people, people to go on the airways and begin to promote their message and promote their viewpoints. And so they look to use problems to advance the agenda as opposed to solve problems. And what happened is after Powell got his memo together after this had begun to launch. The 1970s hit. And in the 1970s, you had the oil shocks. And one of the things that happened, you had the Great Society under Johnson. He went and he addressed some of the social issues of the day. And but one of the other things that was going on was Vietnam War. And he also cut taxes. And what ended up happening was, with all the extra amount that we spent to fight Vietnam, when all on the government's credit card. The tax breaks that, as we were accumulating more and more debt, he was now giving tax breaks to the richest Americans. And what ended up happening when the 70s hit, you had the Yom Kippur War, and there was an oil embargo from the Middle East on the US, and that tripled the price of fuel here in the US. And so we ended up with a decade of just economic mayhem. We had stagflation. We had many bouts of inflation that we went through as we were trying to deal with the tremendous amount of debt that the wars, that Vietnam and other things cost us. And what you find happening is, during this time, the class that did not like the New Deal was beginning to organize and create a message to go and say, you know what, let's take things in a new direction. Let's go and create a different economy. And come 1980, everything seemed to be in place. And Ronald Reagan came on the scene, and he came on the scene talking about welfare queens. He came on the scene looking and painting a clear enemy, a clear reason for all the different things that happened in the 1970s. And he said, you know what? We are going to cut your taxes. We are going to make things better for you. And he brought in a new economic order. The first thing he did was there was a strike with the air traffic controllers, the PACO strike. He went and he fired all the air traffic controllers, giving a message to unions. He was giving the message that, you know what, we are not going to protect labor. We are not going to allow workers to have leverage. He went after the social safety net. He did that by demonizing the poor and the people on the lower end, and saying, hey, look, the reason for the economic issues, it's their fault. And what ended up happening was he was able to push through these tax cuts. He was able to push through a lot of his policies. They began to gut regulations that would keep different corporations in check. And as he did this, there was a bout of new investments. He exploded the deficits. And what happened with the economy was there was a sugar high. By the time he left office, he had a 70% approval rating. And what he put in place was temporary, because it looked to he was doing what happened with the Vietnam War, where you had all this massive government spending, and afterwards you had a collapse. And you saw during H.W. Bush a recession hit, and you saw he had to begin to pull out from that. And as Bill Clinton came on board, he looked at things and he said, you know what? Let's do a third way. Let's try to put a nicer spin on this. And what he instituted, I would classify as responsible Reaganomics. He was able to balance the budget. He cut funding to both the military and to social programs. He went and he also, as he left office, he reduced capital gains tax. And one thing about capital gains tax, that is primarily paid by the wealthy individuals. A lot of times that's the biggest chunk of tax that they have to pay is in capital gains. And he did the welfare reform, which his welfare reform reduced the ranks on welfare by about 50% nationwide. In some states, in Mississippi, it was 80%. His work requirements was not just the fact that, hey, he wanted people to work. It was extra paperwork that people had to file and people had to get approved. And a lot of times it wasn't that people weren't working. It was they now did not have the ability to do the paperwork. And so you had a lot of people that qualified but wouldn't get the benefits because of all the roadblocks that were put in place. From Clinton, you had Obama. Obama came in. Well, from Clinton, you had George W. Bush. George W. Bush came and doubled down on Reaganomics, and he created another sugar high, which collapsed while he was still in office. And he took a budget surplus and he just spent like crazy. And then he had the SNL disaster. And he basically did all the same mistakes that Reagan had done. The only difference is the price that was paid for it did happen during his term. By the time Barack Obama took office, they had 60 votes in the Senate, but just for a short window. And he pushed through as much as he could, but by that time, there was enough of the Democrats that had aligned themselves with the third way and with Bill Clinton's view of how to do things, that the reforms that would go back to what was started under the New Deal, what Johnson tried to push through, that was no longer possible. And as we move into Trump, you see Trump again doubling down on reducing taxes. And every time they've reduced taxes, you see taxes go up in other areas. So they reduce the federal income tax, and you will see your real estate taxes go up. You will see the sales tax go up. You will see the gas tax go up. And so every time they come in and they say, we're going to cut your taxes, they're not cutting your taxes. And as Trump has now come in, he's doing the same thing. And as they cut the taxes, they do create a tax cut for the wealthiest. And it is at the expense of the working class. And that dynamic and that aspect in taxes is part of the reason that has created the stagnant wages. And as this is happening, you have seen many people as the economy is beginning to sour again, you see many people that they look and they're not happy with the Republicans or the Democrats. If you look at most Trump voters, most of the average voters that went to Trump, they don't like the Democrats or the Republicans. I have clients that come in quite often that are Trump supporters, and they also like Bernie Sanders. They think they look and say he is a great guy, and you know what? I like Trump. What they are looking at is, the re the Democrats have failed them, and the Republicans have failed them. I am looking at the Democratic Party right now and saying, you know what? Uh, not many people like the Democratic Party. Their approval rating is in the tank. I think it is a good time for Democrats to run against the Democratic Party, and I think that is a winning message because people are looking for a message that says, you know what? Yes, both the Democrats and the Republicans have failed you. And the difference between what the message from Trump and some of the new MAGA movement is they will look and they identify the pain of the voter. The voter will look and say, my healthcare sucks. And so the MAGA movement has said, well, your healthcare sucks. So the problem is look at these poor people that are on Medicaid. Their healthcare is too good. And so they look at someone that the voter can blame, as opposed to saying, yes, your healthcare sucks. Let's see what we can do to fix your healthcare and make it better. They look and they've heard that promise before, and because it's not getting better, they listen and say, okay, let's blame someone else. And that is the dynamic that I look at and is a real opportunity for the Republican Party to come back and say, you know what? I always remember the Domino's pizza commercials. When the Domino's pizza came on and they said, you know what? Our pizza tastes like cardboard. Our pizza sucks. They did a whole ad campaign about how bad their pizza was and how they were improving things and making things better. And it ended up being a brilliant marketing campaign, and it ended up working really well for them as they rebranded and re-looked at things. And I'm looking at the Democratic Party and saying, you know what? The Democratic Party did goof up when they stopped advocating for the working class. They goofed up when they looked at unions and said, we're not going to fight as hard for you as what we did. When they looked and said, you know what? Yes, we are going to begin to peel back the social safety net. Those failures of the Democratic Party, I look and I say, we need to take ownership of that and go to the voters and say, you know what? Yes, we need to do better, and I do think that is uh, a winning system. And I've heard many Democrats that they look and they are hostile to the Trump voters. The Trump voters that I've talked to that come and I do the taxes all the time, I have found that there is a lot of common ground and a lot of things we agree with. I've heard different Democrats say they don't listen to facts. And when they say that to me, I look and I say, well, if you look at the polls, you know what? Trump is doing bad, Republicans are shifting, and they say, well, no, that doesn't count. And it's like, well, now you're not listening to facts. We always want to maintain when you feel like you're being attacked, you look and you become defensive and facts stop mattering. And so what I found has worked with Trump voters is I don't tell them, you know what, you're wrong. Here are the facts. Instead, I look at the voters and they say, you know what, the economy is rigged. I say, yes, you are right. The economy is rigged. And here's why it's rigged. It's not rigged because somebody's getting Medicaid. It's rigged because we have billionaires and we have people at the top that are gutting the system and taking everything for their benefit. And I find that that framing with Trump voters works, whereas if I just sit and tell the Trump voter they're wrong, eh, I don't go anywhere with that. Um, a couple of things that I look at as going forwards. One of the things when I was in college, I was a political science major, and one of the things they talked about is one of the best thing you can do is to try to look at your opponents and turn their strength into a weakness. And in looking at that, I look at Republicans are known for taxes. Republicans are known that they want to reduce everybody's taxes, and so putting out the fact that no, they have actually increased your taxes, I think is a great strategy for the Democratic Party, and there is evidence to back that up. For every $1 they've reduced your federal income tax by, they've increased your taxes by $2 in other taxes. Um, there's been there has been surveys out there that show that 70% of Democrats believe that Republicans cut taxes. Yet if you look at it, they're not cutting taxes, they're just shifting them, and they're shifting them from the wealthy to those in the lower tax brackets. Powell, with his strategy, and Powell with some of the things he looked and implemented in his memo, he played a long game. And he actually said that in his memo. You can Google his memo and find it and read it's 34 pages long. But in that memo, he outlined a long-term goal. And sometimes we look at just what is going to win us the next election. I think it's time for us to look at a larger project and say, you know what, long term, how can we look to help every American succeed and have a overarching message that we put out to everybody. One of the in my book, one of the things I talk about is the power to divide is the power to exploit. And what that means is one of the things that has been successfully used by the conservative movement is they have looked to divide us, and they've looked to divide us racially. They've looked to divide us on the LGBTQ community. They look to divide us in any way that they can, because if they can keep us divided, that is their ability to exploit the workers. And if you look back at the civil rights movement, one of the things about the civil rights movement that few people are aware of, that was supported by the unions. Martin Luther King, his I Have a Dream speech was written in union offices. They actually paid to help bail people out of jail when they were put in jail in Selma. They helped support a lot of the civil rights movement because they knew that if capital could go and exploit black people, that undercut the wages of everybody. And so, as we look forward, the ability to divide us, and whether or not that's on gender, whether or not that's on race issues, whether or not that's on uh, uh, social identity or sexual identity, that is the wedge they use. And as long as they can keep us divided, we can't work together and we can't demand that we are paid a fair wage. We cannot demand that, you know what happens in government needs to be shared with everybody, not just funneled to the rich. And another thing that they have begun to look at is the power to define is the power to control. And if I can define who you are, I can control who you are. We looked and we saw them try to do that with gay marriage. If they can go and define gay marriage, define homosexuals living together and say that's not marriage, they're able to prevent them from having health care. They're able to control them and say, you know what, you can't work in our military. As they begin to define people, it gives them the ability to control people. And as I look at the pronouns, the him, her, the gender pronouns that people want to place out for themselves, I'm older. I don't totally get it. I don't totally understand that from the younger generation. But oh my God, no government should be able to define that person and tell them that no, they can't use their pronouns. And I don't have to understand that to respect that. And providing the government with the ability to define people gives them the ability to control people. And so I've set up those two dynamics of things that we need to link together, not just for moral reasons, but for economic reasons. And those are the levers that we have to look and guard and say, you know what, we do need to be unified, and that they are attacking these aspects. We need to call government out for that. And I look at those as some of the aspects and some of the things we can do to change things and to push forward. My book, I'm hoping to have something out there in about a week. Um, and once I have that out, I'll share the link. And one of the things that, if you like the book, if you like some of the stuff in it, first of all, I did better at writing the book than sometimes I do at public speaking. But I do need people to read the book and write a review. If I can have reviews written on the book, that actually will help promote it and help distribute it so other people will read it. That is all I have for this evening. Does anyone have any questions?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ann. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm wondering what you think the motivation was for the Democrats, or, what are the things that caused them to turn their back on the working class? Um, you know,
I
I see it here. You know, Sherrod Brown comes to his rich donors and parties, you know, fundraising parties. He never, I mean, not just now. I mean, when's the last time he had a town hall? You know,
Yeah.
and you know, so I've noticed that for quite a while, that they just
Yes.
listen to their rich people. But what's the motivation?
Oh, and this is me speculating. And so don't take this to the bank, but from looking at things, the Democrats have looked and they said their party is here to win elections, and they just look at the next election. They don't look at a long-term horizon. And looking short term with the way part of it is campaign finances. The impact of money on races is just insane, and what it costs to actually run for Congress. What winds up happening is the people that are most willing to sell their souls to corporate interests are the ones that have the ability to compete because they can raise the funds from the corporate interest. Now, there's exceptions to that. And that is what we have to look and promote those exceptions. And one of the dynamics, if you look back to the New Deal, if you look back to major shifts, normally in economic dicey times, the amount of money that and corporate interests that are put into things matters less and less. And so one of the reasons why we were able to advance the New Deal and why we had a new paradigm is because of the Great Depression, because of World War II. The 70s was another window that was disruptive enough for them to create a change. And I'm looking and saying, if this AI bubble bursts, you know what? It won't matter how much money these politicians throw ads out. People will be looking for genuine leaders, and the message is going to be more important than the money. But when times are more stable, the money often overwhelms the message. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Well, I just kind of have a comment, Mark.
Yes.
You know, you mentioned about the AI bubble bursting. Throughout your entire talk, I can't help but thinking, you know, something that you didn't mention, the marketing of trickle down economics.
Yes.
Okay. That's another bubble that seems to be bursting and may allow for, you know, some people like, say, democratic socialists to kind of get a foothold in the political system. Just an optimistic thought.
No, I think you're spot on. As people are very resistant to new ideas and to change until there is economic turbulence, until things aren't working, then they want ideas, they want new thoughts. And we haven't entered that period yet, but I believe that period is coming. And when it comes, if you look at some of the statistics right now, negative views of socialism, I think right now about 50% of the population see socialism as positive. And so the Democrats are trying to react to that by not using socialism, but to call people communists, while they go and buddy up with Putin. So I don't think it has the impact of even just a few years ago.
So we have a question in the chat. Bob Parker is asking, where is your book available?
My book will be available sometime next week. And when it is available, I will give Steve a link to it, and he can share that out. So it's not quite out there yet. And this will be the first version of it. It will be modified slightly as I get feedback from it. So if you see anything in the book and you're like, you know what, he needs to address that, I'll make sure my email is shared and you can let me know of anything that you see and concerns you have with any of the book.
And Bob and others who might have had the same question, I'll get that link to you in a separate email to everybody who registered for this meeting, and it will also be somewhere in CCPC news and events.
Yes. Any other questions?
I think Brian Houlihan has one.
It's not a question, it's a comment. So folks can read the comments in the chat.
Yes.
Brian, can you stay for a minute after the meeting? I was going to call you tomorrow, but since you're here, we can talk now if you'd like.
No other questions.
Well, thank you very much, folks, for showing up tonight. Like I said, we'll get that email to you tomorrow with those links. We'll get the link to Mark's book. We'll get that out to you as soon as we get it. We are not having a December meeting because folks are busy with the holidays, and we are not yet sure our 10th anniversary fundraiser is coming up. We're not sure if we're going to do it in January or February. There's some variables involved in scheduling, but as soon as we, have that stuff finalized, we will get it out to you. So again, thanks for coming, and hopefully you guys all have a good Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see you soon.